November 19th, 1930, 9:47 a.m. Federal Courthouse, Chicago. Judge James Herbert Wilkerson was about to sentence Jake Greasy Thumb Guzik to 5 years in Leavenworth for tax evasion. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, federal agents, curious citizens, all waiting to see Al Capone's money man finally get what was coming to him. But when the bailiff opened the doors that morning, the smell hit first. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Then the sight. Every single seat in the gallery, all 200 of them, was covered in fresh horse manure. Not a little, not a symbolic gesture. Full, steaming piles carefully placed on every wooden bench, the judge's own chair, the jury box, the prosecution's table, everywhere. The stench was unbearable. Windows were thrown open, bailiffs gagged, one reporter vomited in the hallway. And standing in the doorway, waiting to be sentenced, was Jake Guzik. 5 feet 6 inches, 230 pounds of smiling defiance. His hands were clean, his expensive suit was immaculate, and he looked Judge Wilkerson dead in the eye and said 6 words that became Chicago legend. "Looks like you got my message." What nobody understood, what the FBI would spend 6 months investigating, was how Guzik pulled off the most audacious act of contempt in federal court history. And what they discovered didn't just embarrass the federal government, it exposed exactly why Al Capone's Chicago outfit was impossible to take down. Because Jake Guzik didn't just pay off cops and politicians. He'd bought the entire system, right down to the janitors who had keys to Judge Wilkerson's courtroom. To understand what happened that November morning, you need to understand who Jake Guzik was in 1930. He wasn't just another gangster. He was the brain behind the biggest criminal empire in American history. While Al Capone got the headlines, Jake Guzik made the machine run. He managed the money. He distributed the bribes. He kept the books. He was the only man in Chicago who knew exactly where every dollar went. Born near Kraków, Poland in 1886, Guzik came to Chicago as a child. His parents settled in the Jewish ghetto on the west side, running a small cigar store. Jake started working the streets young, running errands, making connections. By his 20s, he was operating brothels in the Levee district. That's where he learned the real lesson of Chicago politics. Everything has a price, and everyone can be bought. When Prohibition hit in 1920, Guzik saw the opportunity. Bootlegging was about to become the biggest business in America, and it would need financing, distribution, protection. It would need someone who understood money, who could manage complex operations, who could keep politicians and police happy. Someone like Jake Guzik. In 1922, Guzik saved Al Capone's life. He'd overheard 2 gunmen from a rival gang planning an ambush. Guzik, who'd never even met Capone, got word to him. The hit was called off. Capone never forgot. From that day forward, Jake Guzik was family. Capone protected him, trusted him, made him the Chicago outfit's treasurer and chief political fixer. Guzik's job was simple but crucial. Every week he sat at a table in St. Hubert's Old English Grill and Chop House on West Madison Street. District police captains would stop by to pick up envelopes, sergeants collecting for their superiors, bagmen from City Hall, aldermen, judges, prosecutors, everyone got paid. Guzik kept perfect records of every transaction, though not in any way the feds could use. The books were coded, scattered, protected. By 1930, Guzik was moving $150,000 a week through his hands just in bribe money. That's over $2.5 million in today's dollars, every week. And that didn't count the gambling profits, the bootlegging revenue, the prostitution income. The Chicago outfit was printing money, and Jake Guzik was the printer. His nickname, Greasy Thumb, came from the literal grease stains on his thumbs from counting dirty money all day. Thousands of bills passed from speakeasy, owners, gambling house operators, brothel managers. Guzik would count it all, sort it, distribute it. His hands were always stained, always moving. He was incapable of violence, refused to even hold a gun. But he didn't need to. Money was his weapon, and he wielded it better than anyone. The federal government knew it. That's why they went after him with tax evasion charges. They couldn't prove murder, couldn't prove bootlegging, couldn't prove any of the violent crimes. But taxes? That was different. In 1927 alone, Guzik had unreported income of over $150,000. The Bureau of Internal Revenue had found the checks, traced the accounts, built an airtight case. On November 19, 1930, after a short trial, he was convicted on all counts. 3 weeks before sentencing, November 1, 1930. Jake Guzik sat in a back room at the Four Deuces, Capone's old headquarters on South Wabash. Across from him sat Al Capone himself, along with Frank Nitti and Murray the Camel Humphrey. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Humphreys. They were discussing Jake's upcoming sentencing. 5 years, Capone said, lighting a cigar. That's what Wilson told me. Maybe more. Wilkerson wants to make an example. Guzik nodded. He'd expected it. Judge James Herbert Wilkerson had already sentenced Capone's brother Ralph to 3 years for the same charge. Wilkerson was one of the few judges in Chicago who couldn't be bought. He'd been a federal prosecutor, a county attorney, a state utilities commissioner. He was 61 years old, respected, feared, and he hated the Chicago outfit with a passion that bordered on religious zealotry. I can do 5 years, Guzik said quietly. I've been preparing, got my lawyers ready for appeal. But I want to send a message first, not to Wilkerson, to everyone watching, to every prosecutor, every agent, every politician who thinks they can come after us and walk away clean. Capone leaned back, interested. What kind of message? Guzik smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. I want to show them that even in their own courthouse, even in front of their own judge, even with all their federal power, they don't control anything. We do. I want to humiliate them so badly that every time they walk into that courtroom, they'll remember who really runs Chicago. What Guzik was proposing was insane. The federal courthouse at 219 South Dearborn was supposed to be untouchable. Guards at every entrance, locked doors after hours. The building was 8 stories of granite and marble, designed to project federal power and authority. Breaking in wasn't an option. Getting past security wasn't an option. Whatever Guzik was planning had to come from inside. That's when Murray Humphreys spoke up. Murray was the outfit's labor racket specialist, a genius at infiltration and corruption. We don't need to break in, he said. We're already in. We've got 3 janitors on the payroll, have had for 2 years, part of the building services contract. Guzik's eyes lit up. They have keys. To everything. Courtrooms, offices, storage. They work overnight, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Place is empty except for 1 guard at the main entrance. The plan started forming immediately. Guzik wanted something that would make headlines, something that would embarrass the federal government, something that would demonstrate the outfit's reach. He didn't want violence. He wanted theater. He wanted a message that would echo through every courthouse in America. You can convict us, but you can't humiliate us. We'll humiliate you. Horse manure, Guzik said finally. Fresh, everywhere, on every seat, every surface, everywhere people sit. Make it so they can't use that courtroom for a week. Make it so every reporter in Chicago writes about it. Make it so Judge Wilkerson walks in there and knows, absolutely knows, that we could have done anything we wanted in his courthouse. Capone laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the kind he rarely gave anymore. Jake, you magnificent bastard, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. But Frank Nitti was worried. If they trace it back to us, if they catch the janitors, they'll add years to your sentence. Contempt of court, obstruction of justice, maybe even terrorism charges. Guzik shook his head. They won't catch anyone. We'll use the Mancuso brothers. They run a stable in Cicero, off the books. Cash payment, no names. The janitors don't know who hired them, don't know why they're doing it. Just following orders from their supervisor, who'll swear he never gave those orders. The Mancuso brothers deliver the manure in burlap sacks, leave it in the loading dock. The janitors distribute it. By morning, everyone's gone, and there's no trail. Over the next week, the plan was refined. The Mancuso brothers would collect fresh horse manure from their stables, the kind that comes from horses fed rich grain, the kind that stinks worse than anything. They'd fill 50 burlap sacks, 200 pounds total. On the night of November 18th, they'd deliver it to you, the courthouse loading dock, at 2 a.m. The janitors would bring it up the service elevator, distribute it throughout Courtroom 6, Judge Wilkerson's courtroom. By 3:30 a.m., the job would be done. By 6 a.m., when the day shift arrived, the overnight janitors would be gone, and the sacks would be burned. But there was one more detail. Guzik wanted to be there. Not during the actual operation, that would be too risky. But he wanted to be the first person to walk into that courtroom in the morning. He wanted to see Judge Wilkerson's face when he opened those doors. He wanted everyone to know, without anyone being able to prove it, that Jake Guzik was behind this. November 18th, 1930, 2:17 a.m. A truck pulled up to the federal courthouse loading dock on Clark Street. Two men got out, brothers named Vincent and if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Angelo Mancuso. They owned a stable in Cicero that provided horses for deliveries, wagons, the occasional police-mounted patrol. They'd been paid $500 cash to deliver 50 burlap sacks to this address, no questions asked. They didn't know what was in the sacks. They'd been told not to ask. In Chicago in 1930, that was business as usual. Inside the courthouse, 3 janitors were waiting: Edward Kelly, Thomas O'Brien, and Samuel Kowalski. All 3 were on the outfit's payroll, $200 a month each, just to be available when needed. Usually that meant leaving a door unlocked, looking the other way, passing along information. Tonight was different. Tonight they'd been told to distribute the contents of these sacks throughout Courtroom 6. They weren't told why. They didn't ask. When Murray Humphreys gave you an order, you followed it. The loading dock had one guard, a 62-year-old former cop named Walter Schmidt. He was also on the payroll, though he didn't know it. His supervisor, who handled scheduling and assignments, was getting kickbacks from the outfit. Schmidt had been told to take his break from 2 to 2:30 a.m. He did. When he came back, the truck was gone and the loading dock was empty. The janitors worked fast, service elevator to the 6th floor. Courtroom 6 was at the end of the hall, double oak doors, brass handles. Kelly had the key. They'd practiced this route twice before, just to make sure they knew the timing. Inside, the courtroom was dark, empty, imposing. The judge's bench at the front, the American flag in the corner, rows of wooden benches for spectators. They started with the gallery. O'Brien opened the first sack, and the smell hit immediately. Fresh horse manure, still warm, mixed with straw and grain. He poured it onto the first bench, spreading it evenly. Then the second bench. Then the third. Kelly and Kowalski worked the other side, moving methodically. Every seat, every bench, every surface where someone might sit. The judge's chair got a special treatment, 3 full sacks piled on the leather seat. The prosecution's table, the defense table, even the witness stand, everywhere. By 3:15 a.m., all 50 sacks were empty. The courtroom looked surreal, like a barn that had been dressed up as a temple of justice. The smell was overwhelming, even with the windows closed. The janitors cleaned up the empty burlap sacks, took them down to the incinerator in the basement, burned them. By 3:45 a.m., there was no evidence they had ever been there except for the 200 pounds of horse manure decorating Courtroom 6. The day shift arrived at 6 a.m. The first person to notice was a secretary named Margaret Donovan, who worked for one of the federal prosecutors. She was walking past Courtroom 6 when she smelled it. She thought maybe a pipe had burst, maybe the sewer had backed up. She opened the door to check. The sight that greeted her would become the talk of Chicago for months. By 7 a.m., the entire 6th floor had been evacuated. Federal marshals were called in. The U.S. Attorney's Office was notified. Judge Wilkerson himself arrived at 7:30, marching through the halls with his usual stern expression. When he opened the doors to his courtroom, he stood there for a full minute, saying nothing, just staring. Then he turned to his bailiff and said very quietly, "Get it cleaned up. Sentencing is delayed until this afternoon." Jake Guzik had arrived at 8 a.m. for his scheduled 9 a.m. sentencing. His lawyer, Benjamin Epstein, was with him. When they were told about the delay, Guzik asked why. The bailiff, a young man named Robert Fletcher, couldn't help himself. "Someone filled the courtroom with horse manure last night. Every seat. It's a disaster." Guzik's face showed no expression. "That's terrible. Absolutely terrible. Who would do such a thing?" "That's what we're trying to find out, Mr. Guzik." By noon, the story had reached the newspapers. The Chicago Tribune ran it as front-page news. Federal courtroom vandalized on eve of gangster sentencing. The Chicago Daily News was more direct. Manure bomb hits Judge Wilkerson's court. Every reporter in the city wanted to know who did it and how did they get past courthouse security. November 19th, 1930, 2 p.m. Judge Wilkerson reconvened court in a different courtroom, Courtroom 4 on the 5th floor. The smell from Courtroom 6 had permeated the entire 6th floor, making it unusable. A team of janitors had spent 6 hours shoveling manure, scrubbing floors, washing benches. The courthouse administrator estimated it would take a week before Courtroom 6 could be used again. The courtroom was packed, even more than before. Every reporter in Chicago was there. Federal agents lined the walls, and Jake Guzik sat at the defense table, hands folded, face neutral. Judge Wilkerson entered, and the room went silent. Wilkerson was furious, not at the delay, not at the inconvenience, but at the message. Someone had violated his courtroom, his space, his authority, and he knew exactly who was behind it. "Mr. Guzik," Wilkerson said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Before I proceed with sentencing, I want to address what happened last night. Someone vandalized Courtroom 6 with what I can only describe as an act of profound disrespect for this institution, for the federal government, and for the rule of law." Guzik said nothing. His lawyer started to object, but Wilkerson cut him off. "I'm not accusing your client, Mr. Epstein. I have no evidence, but I want to make something absolutely clear to everyone in this room." Wilkerson leaned forward. "Whoever did this, whoever thought they could intimidate this court, whoever believed they could embarrass the federal government and walk away laughing, they are wrong. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Court will not be intimidated. This court will not be mocked. And this court will continue to dispense justice regardless of pranks, threats, or any other attempt to undermine its authority." Then Wilkerson looked directly at Guzik. "Mr. Guzik, you have been convicted of willfully attempting to evade federal income tax. The government has proven that you earned over $400,000 in the years 1927 through 1929 and paid not 1 cent in taxes. You have shown no remorse, no contrition, no respect for the law. It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 5 years in federal prison and fined $20,000. Guzik stood. He looked at Wilkerson, and then he smiled. Not a smirk, not a laugh, but a genuine smile. "Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate your consideration." The audacity of it stunned the room. Here was a man who'd just been sentenced to 5 years in Leavenworth, thanking the judge like he'd been given a gift. "One more thing, Your Honor," Guzik said. "About last night. I was home with my family. I had dinner with my wife and children. I read the newspaper. I went to bed at 9:30. I don't know anything about what happened to your courtroom. But I want you to know that I respect this institution deeply, and I would never, ever do anything to disrespect it." The lie was so blatant, so obvious, that several reporters actually laughed. Wilkerson slammed his gavel. "You're dismissed, Mr. Guzik. Marshals, take him into custody." As Guzik was led away, he passed the row where the reporters sat. One of them, a young journalist named Jake Lingle, asked, "Jake, did you have anything to do with it?" Guzik paused, looked at him, and said, "Looks like someone got their message across." That quote made every newspaper in Chicago. The FBI investigation lasted 6 months. They questioned every janitor, every guard, every person who'd been in the courthouse that night. They traced the manure to dozens of stables in the Chicago area but couldn't narrow it down further. They interviewed the Mancuso brothers, who claimed they'd delivered building supplies to a construction site, not a courthouse. They found nothing. No evidence, no witnesses, no trail. Meanwhile, Jake Guzik's stunt became legendary in the Chicago underworld. It proved what everyone already suspected. The Chicago outfit could reach anywhere, do anything, and never get caught. Judges, prosecutors, cops, they could all be beaten. Not with violence, but with money, planning, and the kind of audacity that made you a legend. Guzik served his 5 years in Leavenworth. He was released in 1935 and immediately returned to Chicago, where he resumed his role as the outfit's chief financial officer. When Al Capone was released from prison in 1939, broken by syphilis, it was Guzik who made sure Capone and his family never wanted for anything. When the National Crime Syndicate formed in the 1940s, it was Guzik who represented Chicago at the table with Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, and the other bosses. Judge Wilkerson never forgot the Manure incident. When Al Capone came before him for trial in 1931, Wilkerson was ready. He'd learned from the Guzik case. He switched juries at the last minute to prevent tampering. He gave Capone 11 years, the harshest sentence in tax evasion history. And when reporters asked him if he thought the outfit would retaliate, Wilkerson said, "Let them fill my courtroom with manure again. I'll still send every one of them to prison." But here's what Wilkerson never understood, what most people missed about that November morning in 1930. The manure wasn't meant to stop the sentencing. It wasn't meant to intimidate Wilkerson. It was theater. It was a message to every criminal in America. The Chicago outfit is untouchable. They can walk into a federal courthouse, do whatever they want, and walk away clean. That's power. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Power. That's what Jake Guzik understood that Judge Wilkerson never would. Guzik lived another 26 years after his release, dying of a heart attack in 1956. He was 69 years old, wealthy, respected in the underworld, feared by law enforcement. And to his dying day, whenever anyone asked him about the Manure incident, he'd smile that same smile he gave Judge Wilkerson and say, "I don't know what you're talking about. I was home that night. Ask my wife." The story became part of Chicago lore. The night Jake Guzik turned a federal courtroom into a barn. The night the Chicago outfit proved that even the law wasn't beyond their reach. And the night that Judge Wilkerson learned that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. It's 200 pounds of horse manure and the kind of balls it takes to put it in the right place.